Welcome to the 45th edition of Make Pro Wrestling Majestic again. I am Tiger Height.
And I am the Gallery of Many Peanuts.
And of course, there is still no champion. This title has been vacant for like 3 months.
Yeah, we're coming up actually on, let's see, it was vacant since like January 21st or something.
Yeah, it was crazy. It's
been over a month since the title has had a title holder, but we'll just roll with it.
Inconsistent scheduling of pay-per-views have totally wrecked this. Anyway,
yeah, so anyways, there's not a pay-per-view going on this weekend.
There is not. Next weekend, if we want to cover Sacrifice, the only one is Revolution.
Well, we're going to cover Revolution, but we're not going to cover Sacrifice.
I didn't think so, but it's there.
I know.
Anyway, so let's talk about our topic, and it was something that we were talking about very tentatively on Friday, I think. And I was like, well, what about this? And you're like, oh, wow, that's actually a really good topic. So let's cover it. These are pro wrestling companies that have made a comeback in one way or another.
Yeah, and initially when we were doing our research, Tiger, you only found 2 promotions, right? But I actually found a lot more.
The thing is that I limited my search to companies that closed fully.
Yeah.
And then reopened.
Yeah.
That's why there were only 2 that I could find because I limited to that. But it's like, okay, well, there's a couple of other...
Well, why don't we talk about one that you didn't consider? Let's talk about MLW, because they actually did close down.
Yes, they did. So MLW...
They closed down in 2004 and were not revived until 2015.
Right. Yeah, that's right. MLW was one of those that did close entirely and came back.
And I think what's interesting about this is obviously MLW came up of age back in the early 2000s after the WWE bought their 2 major rivals,
WCW and ECW, which we'll also talk about.
And MLW was a part of that craze of... There's a lot of independent wrestlers now, and they need a place to...
Well, there's a lot of guys that need work.
Right. So this is kind of that same breadth as Ring of Honor, as TNA. They're really part of that whole spiel.
I mean, I don't think people need to realize how many companies opened right after WCW and ECW folded. There were a lot of companies that did.
Because there was a lot of now all of a sudden open space for these companies to make an impact.
Right.
No pun intended.
Right. So obviously MLW is doing great.
Yes.
They have, I think, like 2 different shows. Including Aztec Underground, which we'll talk about.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that as well because MLW revived another brand, which is also very interesting, and I think we'll talk about that right after this one. But they did buy the rights to Lucha Underground to rebuild as Aztec Underground.
Right, and actually, Dario Cueto is the main producer of it. I mean, whole 9 yards. They brought in a lot of people from Lucha Underground. After Lucha Underground was no longer in existence. So
and I want to talk briefly about kind of the reasons that they did shut down initially and the reasons
of Lucha Underground
of MLW and of Lucha Underground. Okay, they both kind of went defunct because of production issues of production quality, and they just ran out of money.
No, here was the issue to my understanding of Lucha Underground.
Lucha Underground got its funding cut from El Rey Network.
Yeah, El Rey Network had the control of Lucha Underground, and they wanted to go a different direction. Also, it was cut because of funding.
Yes.
The final season was really short, and it wasn't really eventful anyway. So
it wasn't very good either.
Right, it really wasn't. But, you know, Lucha Underground's legacy will always be there in people's minds.
Lucha Underground, I think we've talked about this before, it really helped to...
It brought in a lot of people
bring in Mexican wrestlers to America.
Yep.
To an American audience.
Not only that, but that exposure, too. So, Matt Cross, Pentagon, Phoenix, Brian Cage, Killshot or Shane Strickland, Mil Muertes, there's Katrina, there was a lot of people. Luchasaurus was actually a part of MLW. He was a part of the Serpent Tribe.
Yeah.
A guy who they don't really bring back is Marty the Marth Martinez. I kind of wish they did. I liked him. But I think that's kind of tentative indicative, I should say, of what Lucha Underground really did. And it's very short history. Keep in mind, Lucha Underground was only around for like 3 years.
And it was very popular in those 3 years as well. Yep. But in a way, they did get brought back.
I watched it every single week live. Because I back in the day, I did the live commentary show while watching the show. So that was when I started doing that, was actually around Lucha Underground, and just like AEW, that one got the most views from the channel. They got the most attention. So obviously Lucha Underground holds a special place in my heart. And do they own does MLW and their owners own the property of of Lucha Underground entirely?
Yes, they do.
So they own Lucha Underground, they own everything about it?
Yes, they do.
They bought it from El Rey.
They bought it from El Rey, yes.
Okay.
But yeah, those are two brands, and I think the reason that they are so inextricably linked is because of that ownership. But yeah, MLW, I think MLW was starting to make a comeback in 2007. It was mentioned by various wrestling personalities leading up to its eventual revival, like Eric Bischoff, like Bruce Pritchard. And I think they actually did work on that revival project as well, if I'm not mistaken. To help.
Very briefly, yes. But it never really came to fruition. But then it came back in full force in 2015 under new ownership, I think
it was new ownership.
Yeah, it was new ownership who had a lot of money backing them. Yeah. So that's kind of why MLW is where it is right now, is because of that.
I think the environment is a little bit better now for a place like MLW to thrive, as we have mentioned
because
before.
There are so many other things. There's Fight TV that cuts a lot of deals with a lot of wrestling. There's the internet. There's Twitch. I mean, hell, House of Hardcore streams a lot of their shows on Twitch.
Yeah.
So...
all right, so yeah, that was, like I said, I think it was just one of those...
A two for one. One of the bigger ones right now is Ring of Honor.
And this is a very current
This one
as well.
This one is different than MLW because MLW and Lucha Underground shut down completely, where Ring of Honor went on hiatus and they're restructuring.
Right, but you can essentially call it a shutdown because the Ring of Honor that we know of, and again, we have talked about this.
But Ring of Honor still exists.
It does. In some way, shape, and form, it still exists.
They were still active on all channels. The titles were still being defended on different shows.
They are.
Ring of Honor has still been in existence this whole time. It is not deferred from this. I'm excited for what they're going to do with Supercard. Just because of the new look. I mean, they're going to do everything. This logo is going to be gone.
Right. But yeah, the Ring of Honor as we know it is gone though. It went. I mean, it went away. It's gone.
Yep.
And so it's interesting to see what this new one is going to be. Let's talk about some of the reasons why they kind of went on hiatus. And again, a lot of it has to do with money and funding. And a lot of these smaller wrestling promotions...
Sinclair sucks. I don't like Sinclair.
They're beholden to the corporations and entities that they...
It's not privately funded, and I think Sinclair is still owning it, but they wanted to... Basically, what happened is a pseudo Chapter 7 bankruptcy.
Yes.
Where you close it down, reorganize, and then re-release it.
Right.
Not exactly, because they didn't go into foreclosure or anything, but... the principle's pretty much the same.
Right. And you know, when we're talking about these shutdowns too, we have to understand that usually it's not the promotions themselves that shut down or get reorganized, but it is because of the way that pro wrestling is structured. You don't there aren't very many people who can financially back something as extensive as a professional wrestling promotion unless they got money.
Yeah, let's talk about one who actually does have money. That is WoW. And that was actually a big thing about why we wanted to bring this topic up, is because WoW was created by David McLean back in the early 90s, which was an all-women's promotion, which is the first of its kind in America.
And this also was, again, one of those ones that were backed by a major TV company. Yes?
Back then, yes. But their funding was not good. The ratings were really, really bad because WoW was very hokey in how they presented the women. They had some really weird stuff. But so they shut down. David McLean went on to do Glow, and then he came back with this with the backing of the president of the LA Lakers. She is a sports executive who currently owns all the property of WoW.
Okay.
So she had the backing of that. She's the one who brought in Viacom, CBS, to run their syndicated programs, but it's a partnership. Viacom does not own any of it.
So you're
David McLean is still within WoW, though. That's the thing.
So they're not necessarily beholden to the wishes of said company. They're just a partnership. And see,
it's a partnership.
And again, that is, I think, what we need to understand when it comes to whether or not a wrestling company is viable, is that they want the television. That is what drives the revenues. That is what drives the sales. And if you don't have that, or if you're beholden to the wishes of a company, because running a wrestling promotion isn't cheap.
Right.
You either have to have money or you have to have a guaranteed television slot. Those are the only two ways that you're going to succeed. And if you only have the television slot, for example, like Ring of Honor, they have the guaranteed television slot because of Sinclair, but Sinclair also owns Ring of Honor.
Right.
Sinclair is going to set the budget. Sinclair is going to determine how and if even Ring of Honor functions. Mm-hmm. And so what we see, and this is a very common thread throughout every single wrestling promotion that has gone out of business, is that the primary reason that they had gone out of business is because of the lack of television deal.
Yep.
If you don't have a TV deal, you're going to be in a bad spot.
It makes it easier now, but at the same time, you have to have a place to showcase your wrestling.
Yes.
Either by YouTube, which is what the NWA did, or Twitch, which is what House of Hardcore did, and Impact Wrestling when they were kind of in their slump.
Right.
But then also with major television deals like with Fight TV, which is a great avenue for a lot of these indie wrestling companies to kind of showcase some more of that. We see that with Terminus, or Terminus, or however you want to pronounce it. But then obviously the big time with USA Network and Fox.
And see, even these larger wrestling promotions like AEW and WWE, they are beholden. I mean, their budget is largely set by whatever big TV deal contract they have, and we saw this with the recent departure of Cody Rhodes from AEW. Is that is we now have confirmation that there is a budget that I don't think it wasn't set by the TV deal, but it was set by Tony Khan, with the express idea that the TV deal is going to determine how big the budget is for the wrestlers. Does that make sense?
Yes. So that's also the other point, too, is that he kind of revealed a lot of those issues. But the thing is that AEW does not have that budgeting thing. That is a collaboration between AEW as an independent entity and Turner. Or Turner Broadcasting Service.
Yeah. And
they're the ones who wanted another place. They wanted more AEW, so that's why Rampage exists. Right. They wanted to go off of TNT to TBS, so they did.
Right.
That's all controlled by Turner's company.
Right. It is. And again, the budget is going to determine, or I guess the deal, the
deal,
size
the
of
ratings,
the deal is
the ratings, it's all based on that. It's like, well,
and then that's going to guide what the budget looks like.
Ratings will dictate on how much budget is into
how
show.
Big, or how not necessarily the ratings. No one cares about the ratings.
Well, I mean, you want to invest into that because you want people to watch that channel for advertising. So what matters is how big the TV deal is as far as money. Money is going to control how big the budget is. So the point I'm trying to get to is that every major wrestling promotion lives and dies on how big their television deal is. Yeah, let's talk about one that actually had a TV deal. After this, we'll do more of a discussion.
Okay.
But ECW, they were on TNN, which was a big thing.
Yes.
Especially for what ECW was, and at that time, pay-per-view was a big factor as well with them. ECW had the fan base. They had the attention of the wrestling world around the world at that time, which is really hard for a company that small to do.
Right.
But they did it. And it took them forever. even then, to get a TV deal with TNN because ECW was so extreme.
It was so out there, right? It was left field sort of thing.
Right.
And what happened to it? Well, the minute that they lose their TV deal, there's no value in that company.
Same thing with WCW.
Yeah,
Eric Bischoff was going to buy the company with the wealthy prospectors banking.
Right, and the prospectors were like, as long as we get the TV deal, but guess what? Turner pulled out of that TV deal.
Right, they did not want to have wrestling anymore because Turner was the only one who wanted wrestling on that television, despite WCW despite no matter what, they were getting the best ratings of that entire week on all the channels that they were on. Even in their dying day, they were still number one on that channel.
Right. But the point is that if you don't have a TV deal, no one's going to want to invest.
Right. It's just easier nowadays than it was back in WCW, ECW days.
You don't have to have a TV deal in order to run a successful wrestling
You need a place
promotion.
where people are going to look at it.
Right.
That's literally it. Like, as soon as you have that, like a venue or a wrestling school or something like that, you're going to be fine.
Right.
It's a lot easier now than it was back then because there wasn't social media.
Right.
So when we come back from our break, we're going to continue the discussion. We have a couple of other companies that we want to talk about, and then we're going to do a free form on kind of the future of these brands.
Right.
Essentially. All right. So we are back.
Yeah.
And let's talk about one where so we talked about ECW last, which had the TV deal, but they were just sort of in this weird limbo where it was too extreme for television.
Yep.
But they needed that.
Yeah, but let's talk about its revival as well, because its revival was very much along the same lines as the original ECW, but that was because Paul Heyman was in charge, and then it became a cleaner product once Paul Heyman was kicked out.
Right. The revival of ECW was, I will say there was a lot of stuff that happened with the revival of ECW that was a good thing, like a very good thing. We wouldn't have the CM Punks, the Kofi Kingstons, the Evan Bournes that we see now if it wasn't for that revival ECW program where they're like, let's bring in new stars sort of thing. It gave an avenue. So I think even though the revival wasn't as successful, it was still important for even WWE today.
Right.
So, and some of the stars that came out of it to today. And let's talk about the NWA, where it went from the governing body part of it, where it wasn't really a promotion, to what Billy Corgan is doing with it now.
Right. So NWA was it wasn't until very recently an actual wrestling promotion. It was a governing body that at its peak had pretty much the entire North American market cornered.
Yep.
They pretty much ruled the North American market.
Right. Everybody wanted to be a part of the NWA because they were the ones who would bring stars around.
Right.
But also, it was really prestigious to be a member of the NWA, and every promotion that was underneath that banner, no matter where you were, was dominating that perspective territory.
And every single modern wrestling promotion, even the ones that we're talking about, even the ones that were shut down, can trace their beginnings back to an NWA.
Hell, WWE was a part of the NWA with not Capital Wrestling. Was it Capital Wrestling that was a part of the NWA?
No, it was WWF.
No, it wasn't.
Yeah, it was World Wrestling Federation. Yeah, that was a part of the NWA. Or maybe it was the Triple WF, Worldwide Wrestling Federation.
No, I thought the CWC was a part of them, but when they broke off, they converted to the Worldwide Wrestling Federation. Because it went CWC, WWF, WWF, WWE. That's the order.
Right, but it wasn't. But it was the WW. I think it was the WWF when they were part of the NWA. I think even the WWF itself was part of the NWA for a while. Yeah, until like 1985 or something.
Yeah, but
they again, that's another conversation.
That's a whole other. That might be a really good topic. I'll put that down on our list.
But then you got Eastern Championship Wrestling, which became ECW.
Jim Crockett Promotions and Georgia Championship Wrestling,
which became WCW.
WCW. Both of them were a part of that. Florida Championship Wrestling as well.
Yep.
became part of the AWA, the American Wrestling Association, became a part of that.
And then even in the modern day, I don't think Ring of Honor was ever part of the NWA.
No, they were never part of the NWA, but
Impact Wrestling
was.
Yep,
they were NWA TNA way back in the day.
MLW, I believe, was as well.
They were. Yep, they were part of it.
So a lot of these modern wrestling promotions also trace their beginnings back to the NWA. But the reason I want to bring it up is because after that era, they kind of died down, and they became pretty much irrelevant.
Right.
And what happened was then there needed to be a change in direction. So that's what Billy Corgan did.
Yeah, Billy Corgan bought everything NWA, all the properties, all the licenses, and everything right after the Impact Wrestling snafu that he was a part of.
That was in 2014, I believe.
Yes, it was in 2014.
And then what happened with that was he decided to no longer license out the NWA name.
Yep.
And I actually think that process started in 2012. I think the previous owner decided to no longer give out the NWA name, but there were still some promotions using it, and there still are some promotions using it to this day.
Yep, it's a grandfathered law.
It is. It is. So they were grandfathered in, but
in legalities, it's going to be really hard for them to do that unless Billy Corgan had a stranglehold on it, but he really doesn't, because I don't think Billy Corgan just doesn't seem like the kind of guy to be that vindictive.
Yeah, and you will see some brands still use the NWA name. Like, I think NWA Wildside still uses it.
Yep, there was a NWA Hollywood for a long time.
Right, there was an NWA St. Louis. And, you know, there are a couple of promotions that still use that.
Yep.
But
I'm sure they pay a license.
Right, yeah, Corgan. He does. They do. But Billy Corgan transformed the NWA from a governing body into an independent wrestling promotion. And now it's one of the most popular things in North American wrestling. When they do a pay-per-view, you know it's going to be a stacked card.
I mean, the Crockett Cup is coming up like next month on the 15th and 16th, and I'm excited for it.
Right.
And it's a really small promotion that I don't even watch the weekly show, but they just built it so well, and it's such a different feel. And I think a lot of people enjoy it. It's such a nice, refreshing change of pace. And also, let's talk about WoW, which was also becoming one of those things as well. It's now Well, it's before it was more of a hokey show, but now it's being
taken a little more seriously.
Right. It used to be a reality-based show because that's what David McLean originally wanted to do, but now he doesn't. He wants to do something totally different, all well and good. But now this is actually being run creatively by AJ Lee.
Right.
So they have their backing to it because the president of the LA Lakers, and she's been within the realm of sports executives since she was, I think, like 15.
Yeah.
I mean, her dad owned the Lakers before her, so there's definitely the lineage there.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to see where they go.
But let's talk about another one who has a very long history of ups and downs, Impact Wrestling.
Impact Wrestling.
We cannot talk about promotions that have done a revival without talking about Impact Wrestling.
Where it went from...
Because they've done like 2 or 3 different revivals, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep. Because what happened was that it was popular. They started to run out of money. Dixie Carter it did this because this is when it was Kurt Angle, Samoa Joe, Christian Cage.
Let's talk about this. There's the NWA TNA era with Jeff Jarrett and company, and then they ran out of money. And then Panda Energy bought it, which is where
Dixie Carter came into play.
Dixie Carter came in. Dixie Carter brought it back up, and it became even more and more popular. They had the Spike TV deal. They were signing all these wrestlers. They even dabbled in Monday nights for a while.
That was a really that was the Hogan. The Hogan era started to do this again with the Hogan era
because I think she over-egged the pudding with Hulk Hogan. Well, she did. Let's be honest.
Well, Spike TV wanted it.
Right.
That was Spike TV was, I think, like sort of paying Hogan directly to appear there.
And then everything went to shit. And then they lost their Spike TV deal, and they had to negotiate new contracts every single year with other television.
Then Billy Corgan came in, and it started to kind of do this a little bit, but the whole fiasco, it dipped down again.
Right. But and it almost went, I mean, they almost went out of business.
Yeah.
There were points in time when they were
They didn't have money to run the taping.
Right.
Like that. It was that close.
They were that close on just being shut down entirely. But Anthem then came in. I think Anthem was there beforehand. So, let's talk about this. So when Anthem there was an up and a down with Anthem.
Yeah, there was an up and a down with Anthem.
What happened was Anthem bought the company, And they brought Jeff Jarrett back, but Jeff Jarrett was running his own promotion called GFW, and they were trying to merge the two. And then they merged the two, and then Jeff Jarrett left, and he wanted to take GFW.
Because they never finalized the deal with Jarrett because apparently Anthem are a bunch of morons who don't know how to do this.
And then they went through another restructuring, and that is when you have now the Scott D'Amore era.
Right. Well, now Scott D'Amore has been a booker for a very long time, and he did book TNA at one point in time, but he's now the head of it. And he obviously, Impact Wrestling, I think, is doing better now than ever. I think they have a very compelling product. It's a lot of fun. We go to it every time they come to Vegas.
But the point is that Impact, you can't talk about wrestling companies that have gone through revivals without talking about the 8 different revivals at this point that Impact Wrestling has gone through.
This is the little engine that could, and they're striking more than they're missing right now.
Right. But are there any others that is there any other wrestling promotions that you can think of off the top of your head that we haven't talked about?
Now, there was one that I pseudo talked about because it was a buyout. And then it was rebranded. I didn't put it on here because I wasn't sure if it counted. But since we brought it up, Jim Crockett Promotions or Georgia Championship Wrestling, when it was bought out by Ted Turner and TBS, and then converting it into WCW for a direct competition.
I think it went through the same process that Impact Wrestling went through.
It did.
So there was
Jim Crockett Promotions was one of the biggest promotions ever because the Southern Wrestling Territory had. They had the Atlanta Charlotte market pretty much. Atlanta, Charlotte, even Florida to a point. That whole area all worked really well together. New Orleans was a big wrestling area. Mobile, Alabama, even still to this day it is for some reason or another. But Georgia was a big one.
Right. But then they lost the TV deal to Vince McMahon because the Superstation. Because Vince McMahon bought the rights to that library.
It didn't last long.
No.
But that was there, Black Saturday.
Yeah, but what happened
was
then it was bought out by Turner and it went through a revival. Now, in that case, I think it's because Ted Turner liked wrestling and he had a beef going on with Vince McMahon. So I think it was more of a personal vendetta than anything.
It was totally petty. But the thing is that Turner had the money to burn at that time. Back in the early the 80s and 90s, TBS is where you got everything.
Right, it was, and he was very wealthy and had obviously the TV deal.
They were the powerhouse in cable television.
Yeah.
TBS did all the sports. That's where usually all the sports were. I don't even think ESPN existed at that time.
No.
You go to TBS or TNN for your sports.
Right. But, now that we're kind of at the end of this, I mean, are there any other wrestling promotions that we haven't touched on?
Not off the top of my head.
Okay. But I think we can draw a couple of very important conclusions to this. Number one, this is the most obvious thing, is that TV deals are still very relevant.
In one way or another, you have to showcase your product somewhere.
And TV is still a very powerful avenue to showcase that talent.
It's not as guaranteed as it used to be, but it is still very prevalent.
And we're not talking about the TV deals for the sakes of ratings anymore. We're talking about the TV deals for the sakes of getting money. Because TV companies will pay a lot of money to have wrestling content.
Yeah, but ratings are still going to have to drive it because the big advertisers want to be on those channels. Did Applebee's really want to be a part of when they were doing the Ukraine shit? No, I don't think any company wanted that. Domino's had a big thing after Domino's. The Domino's commercial happened right after Nick Gage used the pizza cutter on Jericho's head, and they got pissed off about that.
Yeah.
And they had to change it. Why? Because they want a good show, ratings-wise. I don't care what you say. Ratings still drive where advertisers go, and advertisers want money. So the companies want to have the best rating show because that's where all the eyes are going to be.
But it's not as important as it used to be. Obviously, WWE is still getting their billion-dollar contracts because it's the WWE.
Because WWE is based on their reputation now, not necessarily based on the numbers.
Right.
But a smaller company, pseudo, as comparison, like AEW, or Impact Wrestling,
you're not going to see those guys on Fox. Not anytime soon.
I wouldn't hold my fucking breath on that.
Yeah,
we said we would never see a viable competition in our lifetime, and yet we're still sitting here talking about AEW, which is still probably one of the biggest competition-wise because they actually have money back.
But so I think the important thing, number one, TV deal is going to be very important. Regardless of how of how good the ratings are, you have to have a good television deal because that will determine how. Because you get money. These wrestling promotions, they get a lot of money from these TV deals, and they use that money to then hire the best talent so that the talent can draw people in so that they get even bigger ones down the road.
Or they go into bigger venues.
Right.
And it looks much better on television.
Right.
Their production gets a little bit better.
Yep. So TV ratings are just driving it. If you don't have television, you might as well become an indie promotion. You might as well work at a bingo hall.
And we're not necessarily saying that's a bad thing.
No, it's not. No, there are
Obviously, Impact Wrestling has maybe 200 people in the shows, but there is a different energy with Impact. They're not trying to face WWE anymore.
No, they're not. But Impact Wrestling, again, when they lost TV deals, the TV deals that they had been getting had been
they were
worse.
on Spike when Spike was a huge thing.
Yeah, imagine
Raw was on Spike at one point in time.
Yep, imagine how much money they got from that television.
It was insane.
That's how they could hire Kurt Angle. That's how they could hire Samoa Joe.
Samoa Joe was there before, but
again, the point is that you need to. It's very important to have television.
Look at WoW and Viacom. I mean, Viacom ain't no small bones. Viacom is a huge thing. Now, it's not on one of their biggest channels. But it's still a television deal. And keep in mind, WoW came back, I think, in 2018.
Yeah.
It's still fairly young in this new era. And then with the pandemic, that didn't help any situation whatsoever. I'm surprised a lot of these companies kept the deals that they did even during that whole thing.
So, and then I think the other thing too.
Another one we didn't even think about: Lucha Underground. They were owned by El Rey, which was, I think, the biggest the biggest at least American Spanish-speaking channel next to maybe Telemundo.
Right. But again, and then I think the other thing too is that if you don't have a great relationship, or if these companies if you're being owned by these television producers or these television production companies, if they decide to gut you, that's pretty much it. We've seen that with Ring of Honor. Ring of Honor is owned by a television conglomerate. So they are owned by
Dixie Carter during that downward spiral made fun and mocked the people from the Spike executives. You need to maintain that level of professionalism when you are in discussions, even if it's through an email, because you never know who's going to send it to. Everyone sent an email to somebody that they did not want to. And I think that's kind of where that point was missed as well, is that when you are a business person, you need to take your personal morals outside of that business.
Right, because you need to maintain that professional demeanor. Because if it wasn't for that email, I think that TNA would have still stayed on Spike for a little while longer.
Yep, absolutely. I 100% agree with you. They were trying to do shady shit. Don't do shady shit. When Spike TV says, do not hire Vince Russo with your company, don't hire him. Because that was the nail on the coffin for them, was that Vince Russo was giving them advice, and they sent it instead of to Mike Tenay, they sent it to Mike Kelly, the guy from Pro Wrestling Torch.
Right. And then the other thing, so being a part of that, the whole television thing, the relationship between television and professional wrestling, that's a whole conversation that we can have, obviously, but it's very important. It's a double-edged sword as well.
Oh, absolutely. Lucha Underground, because a lot of their contracts were not through Lucha Underground. They were through El Rey, and we saw the lawsuits right after where they couldn't get out of their contract if they were signed with Lucha Underground. But the problem was that Lucha Underground only ran a certain amount of time.
Right. And Mexican wrestling promotions very commonly are owned by television networks.
Yeah, they absolutely are.
AAA is owned by, I think majority of ownership is by a television network.
Yep.
Same with, I don't know about CMLL's case, but I know that AAA.
CMLL is essentially of what WWE is. Mm-hmm. They are CMLL. They've been around since the 40s. They own the building that they run the shows in.
So they're not necessarily owned by television, but you know what I mean. A lot of television networks have stakes in professional wrestling because professional wrestling still draws in revenues.
Professional wrestling still draws, period. And people are like,
does.
oh, it does. Yeah, but
as with any other sport, you want those sport or entertainment contracts because you're guaranteed a lot of quality content out of it.
Exactly.
But that's pretty much all I've got as far as professional wrestling promotions that made a comeback.
Yeah, maybe we'll see some of these properties come back in another form or fashion.
Yep.
Obviously, we can't rule out there are plenty of properties that are kind of lost in the ether, and of how readily available a pseudo television deal to promote the product, the wrestlers that are going in between places, and the independent workers that a lot of people want to see. I think it's easier now more than ever to maybe kind of look at this and say, hey, this is viable stuff right now. Let's have a backing with this and maybe get another company involved and say, hey, let's promote this. And we're seeing that all the time with Terminus, for example. There are wrestlers who are doing the shows.
Right.
They're not the biggest things, but they don't have to be anymore.
Right.
You can still have a fun little indie promotion like Terminus and be fine.
Still drawing some ratings.
Right.
So that's pretty much all I've got. Is there anything else you want to discuss? If there isn't, next week, AEW.
Yes, next week, AEW Revolution. We're bringing back Wrestling Lesson. We're still bringing back Heckling from the Hard Camera, and we'll continue to put in more product just like this. But if you did enjoy it, remember to like, follow, subscribe, share it with all your friends, become a patron. There will be a link tree down below for all of those. And as always, be
majestic.